You're about to watch a story many don't want to hear because it ends badly for the average person. But skipping the truth won't stop what's coming. Picture this: in 1789, the world's most advanced nation collapsed in 5 years. In 1917, an empire spanning 180 million people crumbled in months. In 1959, a relatively modern country flipped overnight. All followed the same playbook. And today, 2025 America is reading from the same script. It's not about ideology, it's about math. History shows that when certain pressures build up inequality, corruption, radicalized middle class, institutional collapse, revolution isn't a remote possibility, it becomes inevitable. And the terrifying part, we're already in stage 4. You think your 401k, your house, your retirement plan are safe, because this is America. That belief is part of the problem. Your brain's doing what it always does, trusting normalcy, assuming the system will simply carry on. But that's a dangerous bias called normalcy bias. It says, it's always been fine, so it'll always be fine. It's wrong. Right now, the national debt has shattered records, topping 37 trillion and headed toward 38 trillion in mere months. Millions of middle-class families are working harder than their parents did, yet getting farther behind. Meanwhile, the top 1% own more than ever. Sound familiar? Here's a question for you: if the very foundations of our society are shaking, what will happen to your house, your pension, your kids' future when the quake hits? Over the next 8 parts, we're going to trace how revolutions actually happen, not with a violent takeover, but with an invisible erosion of the social contract. We'll show you the 6-stage cycle, walk you through where America stands today, and reveal what you must do now while the system still holds. This isn't a doomfest, it's a warning and a roadmap, because knowing where you are in the cycle gives you power most people don't have. And power is the best kind of insurance, so hold tight. The pattern never lies. History isn't chaos, it's choreography. Every great collapse, France, Russia, Cuba, dances to the same rhythm, the same 6 steps that turn order into ashes. It starts quietly. Stage 1, extreme inequality. A small elite accumulates obscene wealth while the rest fight for scraps. It's not just unfair, it's visible. Peasants saw Versailles gold walls while they starved for bread. Russians watched Tsarist banquets while children froze. Cubans stared at Havana casinos while the countryside rotted. Inequality by itself doesn't burn a system down, but it piles the dry wood. Stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. The rulers stop solving problems. They become the problem. France borrowed until bankruptcy. Russia obeyed mystics instead of generals. Cuba sold its soul to gangsters. When citizens realize the government serves itself, faith dies one headline at a time. Stage 3, middle class destroyed and radicalized. Revolutions never begin with the poorest, they're too busy surviving. They start when the educated class, the ones who believed in hard work, lose everything. When the lawyer, the teacher, the merchant decide the system's rigged, that's ignition. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. Courts, police, press. Elections, once sacred, now suspect. People stop believing change can happen peacefully. That's where we are today. Protests become riots. Trust becomes mockery. Every institution feels fake. Stage 5, revolutionary movements gain mass support. Extremes replace moderates. Hope migrates to the loudest voices promising revenge and redemption. Crowds follow anyone who vows to burn it all down and start over. Stage 6, government overthrown. Chaos follows. And the tragedy? Every time, the new rulers swear they're different. They're not. They purge, they censor, they centralize, and the wheel starts again. It's human psychology on a loop. Fear, anger, mob collapse. Economists call it a cycle. Psychologists call it loss aversion on steroids. People will risk everything to reclaim what they think was stolen from them. And America? Look around: record inequality, paralysis in Washington, radicalization online, trust at historic lows. Stage 4. The pattern doesn't predict, it diagnoses. We're already sick. But once you recognize the pattern, you can prepare instead of panic. Because after stage 4 comes stage 5, the ignition point. And in history, that spark always looks small, until the fire consumes everything. Where will the spark come from this time? Every revolution begins with one emotion: humiliation. Not just poverty, but the insult of watching others thrive while you drown. In 1789, it was the French peasant who couldn't afford bread while nobles fed swans at Versailles. In 1917, it was Russian workers marching for food while aristocrats danced in marble halls. In 1950s Cuba, it was farmers staring at casinos they'd never enter. And in 2025 America, it's a single mom in Ohio watching billionaires fly to space while she drives Uber at midnight just to pay rent. That's not exaggeration, it's math. The top 1% now control about 32% of all U.S. wealth, the largest gap since 1929. Meanwhile, median savings have dropped below $5,000. Half of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency without debt. Home ownership? The dream's evaporating. The median home price is 7.4 times median income, a record ratio that economists call structural exclusion. The result isn't just economic pain, it's psychological. Humans don't revolt over numbers. They revolt over loss aversion. Your brain screams louder when you lose $100 than when you gain $100. Multiply that feeling by millions of households who've lost faith that life will get better, and you get national rage. Meet Tom and Lisa, a real Rust Belt couple. He was a factory supervisor. She taught second grade. In 2008, they lost half their retirement, rebuilt slowly, and by 2023, finally paid off their mortgage. Then inflation hit. Groceries 23%, property taxes 19%. Insurance 31%. They watched 30 years of savings melt in 18 months. Their son, a college graduate, drives for DoorDash because no full-time jobs exist in his town. Tom told a reporter, "We did everything right. Now we're the suckers." That's not an opinion, that's stage one. Inequality alone doesn't ignite a revolution, but it creates the oxygen. And today, the air's thick with it. Luxury home sales are up double digits while credit card delinquencies hit their highest level since the Great Recession. The number of billionaires in the U.S. has tripled in a decade, yet life expectancy for the working class has fallen 3 years. Sound familiar? France called it the bread crisis. We call it the affordability crisis. Different century, same spark. Here's the psychological trap. When people feel the game is rigged, they stop playing by the rules. They stop believing in saving, though, even working. They look for someone to burn it down. That's the moment every empire crosses from decline to danger. So ask yourself, how long can a system survive when its citizens believe honesty is for losers? Because that's the quiet sound of stage 1 turning into stage 2. Every dying empire rots from the inside before it cracks from the outside. And the stench always starts the same way, when laws no longer apply to the powerful. In 18th century France, nobles refused to pay taxes while peasants were jailed for crumbs. In Russia, Tsarist ministers sold war supplies on the black market while soldiers froze barefoot. In Cuba, Batista's government auctioned off justice itself. And in America, 2025, the corruption doesn't even bother to hide anymore at live streams. Let's talk numbers. Lobbying spending hit $5.4 billion last year, the highest ever recorded. That's roughly $10 million per member of Congress. Insider trading by lawmakers? Still legal in practice. The stock portfolios of U.S. senators beat the S&P 500 by nearly 17% in 2024, according to the Capital Trades Index. Coincidence? Sure. And the Easter Bunny files taxes. Meanwhile, the public's trust in Congress has collapsed to 15%, an all-time low. 15. That's lower than the trust rating for used car salesmen. When citizens start laughing at their government instead of fearing it, the regime's already terminal. Remember King Louis XVI? Weak, but well-meaning. He borrowed until France went bankrupt and still threw parties. Or Tsar Nicholas II convinced divine right would save him as his empire bled out. Or Batista, counting casino profits while Cuba starved. Every one of them had the same disease: institutional narcissism, believing power could protect them from consequence. Sound familiar? Here's where psychology cuts deeper. Humans are wired for reciprocity. Follow the rules if you do. When people watch elites cheat, that instinct flips. They feel entitled to cheat to taxes, loans, ethics, anything. It's contagion, and it spreads faster than inflation. Meet Linda, a retired teacher from Ohio. She saved for 40 years, trusted her pension fund. Then, in 2024, the fund collapsed after investing heavily in junk corporate bonds tied to political donors. Executives walked away with bonuses. Linda went back to work greeting customers at Target. She said, "I used to believe the system was broken. Now, think it's working exactly as designed." That's stage 2 in one sentence. Because when the government stops governing and starts grifting, the collapse isn't ideological, it's mechanical. Every regulation ignored, every lie unpunished, chips away at the social contract until nothing's left but cynicism. And cynicism is dynamite. It doesn't explode immediately. It just sits there, waiting for a match. The match is coming. Stage 3 begins when the middle class, the people who used to believe the system could be fixed, decide it's beyond repair. That's when decline turns into rebellion. So ask yourself what happens when the last honest taxpayer finally gives up. Revolutions never start in the slums. They start in the living rooms of people who once believed they were safe. Teachers, nurses, engineers, the backbone of stability, slowly realizing the ladder they've been climbing is leaning against a collapsing wall. That's the American middle class in 2025. Once the envy of the world, now squeezed like a lemon that's already dry. Look at the numbers. Student debt sits around $1.7 trillion, with the average graduate owing nearly $38,000. Housing affordability has cratered. Home prices have risen over 40% since 2020, while wages barely moved. AI layoffs are gutting white-collar jobs from marketing to law faster than the last 2 recessions combined. Childcare costs rival college tuition, while healthcare premiums eat 20% of median income. This isn't a market correction, it's a generational betrayal. Historically, the middle class is society's pressure valve. They tolerate inequality as long as mobility exists. But once that mobility dies, tolerance flips to fury. That's what happened in France when lawyers joined the National Assembly. In Russia when students joined Lenin. In Cuba when doctors and professors had rebels in their homes. And it's happening here. The new American radicals aren't anarchists with masks, they're homeowners. Parents, small business owners watching decades of work evaporate. Take David and Claire, a couple in their early 40s from Phoenix. They both have degrees, work full-time, and still can't afford a 2-bedroom home in their own city. Claire says, "My parents bought a house at 28. I rent at 42. What was the point of following the rules?" That's not just frustration, that's stage 3. The middle class turns from stabilizer to accelerant. Psychologically, it's called status frustration when people who should be winning feel cheated by the game itself. It's the emotional equivalent of being cut in line for your own life. And when enough people feel that way, they stop protecting the system. This is why online rage movements explode overnight. It's why populists on both the left and right gain traction by saying out loud what others whisper at dinner. Maybe the system needs to burn down. That's the sound of the safety net snapping. The moderates, the quiet, responsible ones start to radicalize. And history warns us, once the middle class loses hope, there's no going back peacefully. Because they don't just want reform anymore, they want revenge. And revenge is the fuel that takes a society from discontent to revolution. Next comes the spark, the trigger cascade that turns talk into action. And if you think it can't happen here, you haven't been paying attention. History never announces collapse. It whispers first, then screams. In France, it was bread. In Russia, a march of hungry women. In Cuba, a student protest. In Santiago, tiny sparks, each dismissed by leaders as isolated unrest. Weeks later, revolutions. America's tinder is already dry. The only unknown is what lights it. Maybe it's an economic crash, the Fed raising rates one hike too far. Wall Street melting down under 37 trillion in national debt and 1 trillion in annual interest payments. Maybe it's a contested election where half the nation refuses to accept the result. Maybe it's a viral incident, one video, one shooting, one injustice that detonates the anger sitting under every paycheck. Or maybe it's all three at once. Here's the psychological trigger: herd behavior. When panic starts, logic dies. One person yells, "Bank run," 10 follow, and suddenly 1,000 accounts are empty. That's not stupidity, that's evolution. Your brain's survival code says, if everyone's running, there's a reason. It kept our ancestors alive, but it kills civilizations. You saw it in 2020 with toilet paper. You'll see it again with dollars, fuel, and trust. When France hit this stage, people raided bakeries. When Russia hit it, soldiers shot their officers and joined the crowds. When Cuba hit it, the military simply evaporated, the dictator fled overnight. When America hits it, it won't be muskets or horses. It'll be digital markets freezing, grid failures, cyber attacks, algorithms amplifying panic faster than any police force can react. Imagine a week when ATMs run out of cash, deliveries stop, and everyone's finger points at everyone else. That's how the cascade works. First, disbelief. It'll blow over. Then blame. This is their fault. Then breakdown. Get whatever you can, now. And once trust collapses, everything built on it follows: banks, supply chains, governance, even friendships. Here's the cruel irony. Revolutions aren't driven by the poor or the oppressed. They're triggered by the disillusioned optimists, people who believed in the dream until the dream betrayed them. And when they snap, the floodgates open. We're closer than anyone admits. One spark away from the fifth stage: mass mobilization. When ideology meets desperation, it doesn't matter which side strikes first, the reaction will be the same: escalation, polarization, violence. Because when emotion outruns reason, the pattern finishes what history started. And by the time leaders realize it, they're already running for the airport. The question now isn't if the spark comes, it's when and how fast the fire spreads once it does. Revolutions don't explode randomly. They follow a clock, and America's clock is ticking fast. In the 1780s, it took France 5 years to go from economic stress to guillotines. In Russia, 3 years from breadlines to civil war. In Cuba, 2 years from campus protests to firing squads. Each cycle runs shorter because technology accelerates panic. And in 2025, information travels at the speed of a swipe. Here's what the data says. National debt, $37.8 trillion, and climbing nearly $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments, over $1.2 trillion per year, more than America spends on defense. Household debt, record high, crossing $18.5 trillion, with credit card delinquencies surging past 2008 levels. Savings rate, below 4%, lowest since before the Great Recession. Consumer sentiment, near a 40-year low despite record stock valuations. It's not a recession warning, it's an exhaustion warning. The middle class has no margin left, and Washington's still arguing over which committee to blame. Meanwhile, the psychological indicators are flashing red. Trust in institutions, lowest in U.S. history. Only 26% of Americans trust the press, 15% trust Congress, 34% trust the Supreme Court. Polarization index, at a record high. Half the nation views the other half as a threat to the country. Media ecosystems, algorithmically sealed echo chambers where outrage equals profit. Every time you scroll, the system feeds you confirmation, not connection. That's how stage 4 hardens into stage 5, by replacing shared reality with rival fantasies. When both sides think they're the heroes of a revolution, history guarantees both will bleed. Here's the kicker: once stage 4 begins, stage 5 follows within 3 to 7 years every time. France, 5. Russia, 3. Cuba, 2. We entered stage 4 around 2020, when faith in elections, police, and media simultaneously collapsed. Do the math. 2025-2027 is the danger window. That's not prophecy, it's precedent. And yet, most Americans still believe we'll bounce back. That is normalcy bias whispering in your ear, the same illusion every empire clung to before the fall. It tells you the grocery shelves will always refill, the paycheck will always deposit, the lights will always turn on. But history says otherwise. So, when the next election fractures the country beyond repair, when the debt spiral triggers a currency crisis, when the average American finally realizes their vote, their savings, and their safety net don't matter, maybe not this year, maybe next, but make no mistake, the timer's already ticking, and the closer we get to zero, the fewer off-ramps remain. When empires fall, the ruins look different, but the feeling is always the same. Confusion, fear, denial, then the quiet realization, it's really over. France had heads on pikes. Russia had breadlines and gulags. Cuba had 40 years of ration books and silence. And what would America's collapse look like? It might not be soldiers in the streets. It might be something quieter, a slow-motion unraveling, a cyberattack that kills the grid, a financial freeze where ATMs stop working, supermarkets stripped in a day, banks promising temporary restrictions, politicians blaming each other while ordinary people scramble for insulin, fuel, and answers. That's what Stage 6 looks like, not a movie, but a math equation. Trust equals zero. But here's the good news. History also shows collapse doesn't have to end in chaos if individuals act before the system breaks. Because once the collective loses its mind, only prepared minds survive. So what do? 1. Build your information armor. The first casualty of collapse is truth. Governments spin, media panics, algorithms profit from fear. So you must become your own analyst. Read broadly, follow both sides, track numbers, not narratives, understand patterns, not politics. Because the moment you know how history moves, you stop being a pawn. That's what this channel is about, seeing the storm before it hits. 2. Build your financial fortress. In every revolution, paper wealth dies first. France debased its currency. Russia seized bank accounts. Cuba nationalized everything. The US? We're already printing trillions to survive. So diversify into what governments can't print: skills, real assets, and community trust. Own less debt, more independence. Because the new elite won't be the richest. It'll be the most resilient. 3. Build your local resilience. When global systems freeze, your neighborhood becomes your nation. Know your neighbors, trade skills, stock essentials quietly. History rewards those who prepare early and talk little. In chaos, connection is currency. And maybe, just maybe, America doesn't have to follow the script. Every pattern has an exception. It happens when enough people wake up before the fifth stage ignites. When citizens stop waiting for leaders and start acting like leaders. That's how cycles end, not with a riot, but with awareness. So I'll ask you, where are you watching from tonight? What worries you most about the next 5 years? Comment below, share your thoughts, and let's build a network that learns faster than the collapse spreads. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. Because in the weeks ahead, we'll expose the next piece of the puzzle: how financial systems quietly prepare for revolutions long before citizens ever notice. Stay alert, stay grounded, and remember, the pattern doesn't predict your fate, it only warns you. Whether you repeat history or rewrite it, that part is still in your hands.